10. Scuttled warships. During the First World War, the British Royal Navy's Grand Fleet was based at Scapa Flow, a deep natural harbour off Scotland's Orkney Islands. In 1919, after the conflict ended, the Navy scuttled 74 warships that had belonged to the Imperial German Navy High Seas Fleet. It was the single greatest act of deliberate maritime destruction to ever occur. The British had seized the ship 7 months earlier as a condition of Germany's surrender at the end of the war. Most of these submerged vessels were salvaged throughout the 1920s and 30s, but a handful remain in the harbour today, including 3 König-class battleships, 3 light cruisers, a torpedo boat destroyer, and a mine-laying cruiser. There's also a collection of battleship masts and turrets, along with a multitude of other ship parts that were deemed unworthy of salvaging. Today, the site is a must-see among professional divers who also happen to be history enthusiasts. 9. Buicks Roadmaster hearse. In recent years, photos of a rusting yet paradoxically futuristic-looking Buicks Roadmaster hearse surfaced online. It was reportedly spotted in a field in Greece, leading many to wonder about its backstory. And while the car's exact origins were never explained, savvy internet users have managed to track down some details about the strange-looking hearse. According to one Flickr user, it's a heavily modified version of a 1947 Buicks Roadmaster 8. The car was originally built in Flint, Michigan, back when the automotive production industry was booming in the US. By the time it was transformed into a hearse, it had 18 windows, a Mercedes-Benz engine, and tail and bumper lights from a 1956 Chevy. When the photos first went viral, the car was up for sale. It eventually found a new home with a buyer named Dante Fontana. He posts daily updates on its restoration for his social media followers. 8. Bulgaria cruise ship. Built in Czechoslovakia during the early 1950s, the Russian river cruise ship Bulgaria originally went by the name Ukraina. As the Ukraina, she enjoyed a 55 career that lasted until 2010, when she became the Bulgaria. The 263-foot-long vessel had a cruising speed of 12.7 miles per hour and a 233-passenger capacity, which was reduced to 120 passengers after it was overhauled. Just hours into a cruise along the Volga River in the Russian Republic of Tatarstan on July 10, 2011, the Bulgaria got caught in a storm and sank. It was Russia's worst maritime disaster since 1986. Survivors later recalled that the ship began listing heavily to starboard, and that the situation only worsened when the captain tried turning the vessel around. Because the Bulgaria had no air conditioning, several of the portholes were open and water rushed in. The sinking came without warning, according to one survivor, and it happened nearly 2 miles from shore. It took just minutes for the ship to sink 66 feet to the riverbed, taking 122 passengers with her. 14 of these 79 survivors were injured, and nearly all of them were rescued by the cruise ship Arabella. One survivor managed to swim all the way to shore. Divers recovered the remains of Captain Alexander Ostrovsky and his wife, along with the bodies of nearly everyone else who perished in the disaster. Many more lives could have been saved if at least 2 ships hadn't passed by without stopping to rescue Bulgaria passengers. 2 captains were charged in connection with their alleged failures to attempt to rescue those in peril. The remains of the final 2 missing passengers were found in the ship's hold after it was partially raised and relocated to the shallow waters of the nearby Gulf of Kurelsky. From there, the ship was relocated to a floating dock for further investigation. 7. Soviet mass vehicles. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union developed numerous heavy-duty trucks and tractors called mass vehicles. They were designed to carry all kinds of military materials, including the USSR's growing collection of nuclear missiles. Measuring over 38 feet long, the MAZ 543 was a new and improved version of the MAZ 537. Its primary purpose was to carry artillery rocket and missile systems. It was designed during the early 1960s and entered service with the Soviet military in 1962. Powered by a standard tank engine, the 8-wheeled vehicle had tandem seating for 2 and was capable of navigating on challenging off-road terrain. The MAZ 543 was replaced during the early 90s by the Belarusian MZKT 7930 Astrolog, which entered service in the year 2000. In recent years, urban explorers have snapped photos of an abandoned all-wheel drive MAZ 543 vehicle sitting next to a Bat-M heavy artillery tractor in a remote forest. Images of another site, which appeared in the English Russia blog, show an assortment of Soviet-era vehicles in the woods just outside Moscow. These few handfuls of vehicles represent just a small portion of the left-behind USSR relics that can still be seen throughout modern-day Russia. 6. Sham Rockaway Motorhome. Alma, Michigan native J. Dennis McGuire made a name for himself as the founder of an RV enthusiast group known as the Family Motor Coach Association, FMCA. He also built a one-of-a-kind custom motorhome called the Sham Rockaway, which became famous for a short while before it was left to rot in a junkyard and subsequently forgotten about. McGuire began building the Sham Rockaway in 1948, according to his daughter Colleen, provided the vehicle's only known record. Inspired by his love of Buicks, McGuire built the RV using parts from two 1962 models and the chassis from a 1948 model. He incorporated one intact Buick as the center of the motorhome, while cutting another car in half and attaching the pieces to the front and rear of the RV. The third Buick went on top. In his own words, McGuire said, "I didn't build anything, I just reassembled." He equipped the Sham Rockaway with an 8-cylinder engine, but details on the quality of its performance are obscure. There are no surviving photos of its interior, but reports describe the 28-foot-long, 6-foot-tall motorhome as spacious enough for an entire family. It had a bathroom, a kitchen, and plenty of storage space. McGuire finally finished building the RV when he was 69 years old. He and his wife road tripped through Pennsylvania and Arizona with it. In the early 1980s, businessman Bob Tisch used the Sham Rockaway as the official campaign vehicle during his run for governor of Michigan. The motorhome sat abandoned for years before being purchased by a new owner, who had plans to restore it but never got around to doing so. He offered it for sale, but it's unclear whether anyone bought it and restored it, or if it's still rusting away as a shell of its former self. If you could build a custom car, what would you like it to be? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. 5. Florida Hovercraft. In 2005, a Florida-based company called Atlas Hovercraft set out to become the world's biggest hovercraft design and manufacturing company. According to its president and lead designer Kurt Peterson, each of its vehicles would be between 100 and 125 feet long and would cost around $10 million to build. Using technology that's been around since the 1950s, the hovercrafts would travel over a pocket of air. Production soon began on a vehicle that was meant to ferry civilians across the St. Johns River. Dubbed the AH-100P, it would be equipped with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering passengers a stunning view of the waterway and surrounding landscape as they traveled from one place to another. It would also be quieter, easier to drive, and more efficient than past vehicles of its kind, making it a practical method of transportation. But the huge picture windows were never installed, and the hovercraft was never built past its exterior shell, which was abandoned without explanation after Peterson gave the project's final update in 2008. It remains deserted at the former Leafield military base, which has since functioned as an industrial park since it was repurposed in 1984. Nobody seems to know why the AH-100P or any of the other planned hovercrafts were never built. It was as if Peterson and his company suddenly slipped into obscurity one day without explanation. In 2011, an anonymous internet user claiming to be a former employee said that the AH-100P was cancelled due to a lack of funding, and that he'd heard through the grapevine that Peterson was still involved in developing hovercraft but had moved on to other projects. 4. SS Selma. The world's largest ever concrete ship was the 425-foot-long oil tanker SS Selma. Built in Alabama in 1919, it was produced as part of a plan approved by then-President Woodrow Wilson to continue shipbuilding in the midst of a steel shortage. The plan called for the production of 24 concrete ships, but only 12 were ever built. The Selma was launched on June 28, 1919, the same day World War I ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. Since the ship was no longer needed in war, it went into service as an oil tanker. Less than a year later, it struck a jetty in the Gulf of Mexico, tearing a 60-foot hole in its hull. Efforts to both repair and sell the Selma failed, and US officials ultimately decided to scuttle it in the Houston Ship Channel, where it remains to this day. The partially submerged ship can still be seen today, and is the channel's only permanent wreck. 3. Basnäs Cemetery. Deep in the forest of Sweden's Värmland region, there are hundreds of cars dating back to the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. At the well-hidden property known as the Basnäs Cemetery, visitors find the vehicles stacked on top of each other and parked side by side in endless rows. Located near the Norwegian border, the massive car graveyard has been there for so long that many of the vintage automobiles are covered in moss and overgrowth. Some even have trees growing through them. According to legend, many of the vehicles were left behind by American soldiers when they returned to the US after World War II. But the rumor has never been verified, and a lot of the cars were made long after the war ended. The property is rumored to be owned by a pair of reclusive brothers who interact minimally with visitors and avoid the spotlight. But they live nearby, and they're known to keep an eye on the car cemetery. Past sightseers claim that the owners once left a note scrawled across several car seat covers, stating that it's fine for visitors to come and take photos, but sternly warning them against taking any mementos or leaving the site any different from how they found it. The message further explained that there had been 30 burglaries at the property so far that year, and that the owners were fed up with the repeated crimes. They went on to say that they had set traps inside some of the property's buildings, and that they didn't care if someone got hurt or died. The note also reportedly contained a chilling warning for visitors to remember that they were in a place where nobody would be able to hear them screaming. Nobody knows for sure whether these stories are true or if they're simply the product of local folklore. But many photographers, artists, and explorers are intrigued enough to visit the area anyway, and there are no known reports of anything bad actually happening to anyone. 2. Bellapore Hovercraft. Developed in the early 90s, the British-made Triton 1 and Triton 2 hovercrafts ferried around 1,000 passengers a day between Juhu and Chowpatty Beach in Mumbai, India. Each trip took around 30 minutes, and each vehicle had a carrying capacity of 50 passengers. 2 years after the system went into service, the government still hadn't followed through on its promise to provide jetties and access roads on the beaches. Instead, the hovercraft has a designated parking spot on a plot of land. But local fishermen like to park their boats in the same area, often obstructing the vehicle's path. On top of these problems, the ferry's route was cut shorter than its originally planned length. The last Triton ride took place in 1998. By then, it was operating at a loss. Operations were suspended for the monsoon season that year and never resumed. Today, the Triton vehicles remain deserted and forgotten about on the same plot of land where they were parked nearly 25 years ago. 1. Gutian. The Gutian cargo vessel was the largest ever Chinese-made concrete ship, measuring 345 feet long and 48 feet at its widest point. It was built during China's Cultural Revolution in the early 1970s amid a steel shortage, using concrete as a cheap alternative. Based out of the city of Fuzhou in Fujian province, it made its maiden voyage in 1974. The Gutian was abandoned shortly thereafter due to high operating costs. It sat stranded ashore along the Mingjiang River for nearly 40 years as it functioned as a squatter camp, a tourist attraction, and a training base for a local vocational college. Because it was made of concrete, it didn't deteriorate like most deserted ships. Finally, in late 2012, demolition began on the 3,000-ton vessel. Thanks for watching. Which one of these abandoned vehicles is your favorite? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.